Join me today as we talk about the zombie movie revival that occurred in the early 2000s. This is the Geek Ball channel. My name is Bobbie, and today we're going to be talking about zombie movies. In particular, the revival that they saw in the early 2000s that has continued to this day. And we're going to talk about some of the movies that helped fuel it, and kind of where things were before that. You know, kind of cover some ground here. So if you've seen other videos here on the channel, I've hopefully made it abundantly clear that I really like horror movies, and we've done like some top 10 lists here and there, and talked about horror movies, and I talk about movies a lot, and a lot of them are horror movies and sci-fi movies. And in particular, I really like zombie movies. Now, that does mean that I have watched some real trash, because a lot of zombie movies are, to be frank, quite terrible. This probably has to do with the fact that, they can be pretty low budget. All you need is an even remotely compelling plot, or somehow how the zombies have got here. You need a makeup budget that doesn't have to be huge, some nobodies, a few people that maybe can actually act, a deserted location somewhere, and you're off to the races. So it's actually kind of surprising that there are good zombie movies, I suppose I should say. And there are. And so because of that, it's an easy genre to just jump into with minimal budget. And it actually surprises me that there aren't more Sci-Fi Channel zombie movies because of that. But I don't know. Maybe they're not quite zany enough for the Sci-Fi Channel, because those people clearly are on some high-powered drugs of some kind whenever they come up with half of their movies. But they did have a zombie show, Z Nation. But I'll kind of get into things like that here. So, I don't believe it was entirely the movies that came out in the early 2000s. I think the Resident Evil video game series helped set the stage, because the first Resident Evil came out in 1996, and then eventually had a director's cut and came out on the PlayStation. I'm sure it eventually wound up on other systems, but I think the PlayStation's the main one that most people probably played it on if they played it. And then Resident Evil 2 came out just 2 years later. Now, to my mind, Resident Evil 2 is superior to Resident Evil 1 in several ways. And I think that's a general thought among the fans of the video game franchise, but I could be wrong. The first one does have the hallmarks of the distant location out in the middle of nowhere. You're trapped in a mansion, which ends up being a biolab full of bioweapons created by the Umbrella Corporation. But 2 is a sprawling city hellscape that the zombies have basically overrun, and 3 is set within the confines of 2. And I believe, no, 3 takes place outside of 2. There's a part where your main character gets knocked unconscious, and that's where all the events of Resident Evil 2 take place, and then the rest of Resident Evil 3, which sees the destruction of Raccoon City via nuclear weapon. And Resident Evil 3 came out like just a year after Resident Evil 2, so clearly it's fast-tracked. And then the 4th one was several years down the road, and you weren't fighting zombies in that one. So the main antagonist in those games are zombies, but you eventually run into like other creatures, hunters, lickers, the Tyrant, Mr. X, things like that, the Nemesis, and all kind of other weird mutant monsters. But they are at their core zombie games, all right? And originally, George Romero was going to direct a zombie, an adaptation of the game. There's actually a documentary out about that. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I am curious because I heard things back in the day about the script and everything, and it never really materialized. But this was the early internet, so who the hell knows what was actually true? Um, I mean, there used to be a page called Purple.com, which was just a never-ending scroll of purple. Now it's owned by the mattress people that make the purple mattress. We've lost things on the internet that will never be recovered. The early 90s, the mid, late 90s to like 2005 internet, that's pretty wild. And if you didn't experience it, like, we shall not see its like again, as they say. But anyway, so what brought about the big revival movie-wise? Now you got to understand, the 90s are a particular drought in zombie movies. The real popularity, there are movies that predate Night of the Living Dead, but Night of the Living Dead is what really like sparked the zombie genre to really take off. And then Dawn of the Dead is probably the best of the Romero movies, and to my mind, is a coin toss for the best zombie movie. The other side of the coin being Return of the Living Dead. Dawn of the Dead came out in the 70s. I want to say 78. And that decade saw a number of other zombie movies being made in the 70s and on into the 80s, spinning out of Italian horror. For those who don't know, the Italians initially kind of went after westerns, and that's why there are a number of westerns called spaghetti westerns, because they were made by Italian filmmakers like Sergio Leone. The Man with No Name trilogy, or the Dollars trilogy, as it's sometimes called Clint Eastwood's trilogy that he's best known for, which is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, For a Few Dollars More, and I can't think of the third one off the top of my head. I didn't know I was going to go this way. I would have written this down. No, I can't think of it. I'm not going to sit here and try to come up with it. Those are like the really well-known ones, but there's tons and tons of others made by Italians. A lot of them filmed in Spain because it looks like the American Southwest in parts. But yeah, that's, it's like I said, that's where Clint Eastwood made his name. Like Lee Van Cleef came back in those movies. I don't think Once Upon a Time in America, Once Upon a Time in the West, I don't know if that's a spaghetti western or not, so I couldn't say. But anyway, I'm off track now. After the western kind of died off, they shifted to horror. And so there's a bunch of Italian horror movies, and I've noted before that like a lot of Italian horror movies are just batshit crazy, and like Demons 2, like things just kind of happen in those movies. Like, don't look for logical structure or anything. It's like, no, this would look cool. Let's put it on screen. Well, how'd it get there? Who cares? Just do it. So you get that. And there's certain aspects of the genre they explore, but they really went for gross out horror, and so they focused on zombies, some focused on cannibals, and I think there's actually a cannibal versus zombie movies out there somewhere. And the whole idea being that people being eaten, it's not exactly a sanitary process. Like, a lot of blood and guts get spilled in that, especially if they're being torn apart by another person. Like a shark will bite you in half. Zombies can't bite you in half. They've just got this to work with. They're going to tear you in half, maybe. So there's a number of Italian zombie movies out there. One of my favorites is Hell of the Living Dead, which features some pretty spectacularly gruesome kills in that one. Also, about half the movie is just like random nature footage. Again, Italian horror, what are you going to do? So that kind of continued on into the 80s. I recently talked about the movie Zombie 3, which is towards the end of the 80s. There are two others. There's 4 and a 5, and I don't know if they came out in the 90s for sure or not. But things kind of started to peter out in the 80s. Now, you did have, like I said, you had Return of the Living Dead is, in my opinion, toss up for best zombie movie. And it's like, it's peak 80s. There's Return of the Living Dead 2 that also came out in the 80s. Now, Return of the Living Dead is like half horror, half black comedy. It is like some weird, perfect fusion of the two. Return of the Living Dead 2 went pure comedy with very little horror. Then the 90s saw Return of the Living Dead 3, which swung completely back the other direction, totally devoid of humor and is pure horror. I like 3 more than 2. And then 4 and 5 came out later on after the revival, and they're terrible. So Return of the Living Dead 3 is one of the few zombie movies from the 90s. I'm sure there's several I don't know about, but like the concept as a genre really lost steam going into the 90s. In fact, the only other one I know of off the top of my head, and I'd have to check to make sure it's actually made in the 90s, would be Chopper Chicks from Zombie Town, which I only saw part of one night on USA Up All Night, which I really need to find the movie and watch the whole of it sometime. It looked pretty cheese-tastic. So, in the 80s, you also had Day of the Dead, Romero's third zombie movie. And for a long time, what people thought would be his last zombie movie. Because, like, after that one, it's sometime in the 2000s before he makes another one. It's 2 decades, okay? So, you had everything was losing steam. Then, like I said, then the Resident Evil games came out. And so, in the background, things were picking up steam. And then came the adaptation of Resident Evil in 2002. It's one of the, like, 4 movies that I attribute to the rebirth, the resurrection, if you will, of the zombie genre. Now, it's not a great adaptation of the games. None of the movies are. The movies get more silly and more absurd as they go along. There are 6 of them altogether, which is also absurd. And they feature other monsters, but they do come back to zombies. Like, the zombies are still like a primary threat in most of the movies. And especially in the first one. Because there's an other monster. Other than that, it's all zombies. And, they're the bioweapon, the T-virus, and all that stuff. So, that helped. It's an action movie, but it's an action horror movie, Then, the same year, in 2002, we also saw the release of 28 Days Later. Now, 28 Days Later isn't technically a zombie movie. They're rage monsters. But, in every way that matters, they're zombies, okay? If they bite you, you will turn. In fact, you'll turn in like a minute and a half. Now, they can also turn you just from like, if their blood gets into your bloodstream somehow. Like, that happens to one guy. There's a dead one like up above him, and a crow bites it, and a drop of the blood falls down and hits him right in the eye, and he changes. Then once they're changed, all they want to do is attack people and spread the virus. Now, they don't eat people, but they bite at them and maul at them until they change them. Then the 2 of them go off and try to change more people. So it spreads very quickly. Now, they can be killed by means other than shooting them in the head because they're still alive. They're not undead. They're still alive. So, put enough bullets in them and they'll die. Do enough bodily damage and they'll stop. Which is a good thing because in England there's no guns for anyone. So, that's where the movie takes place. That was where a lot of people got introduced to Cillian Murphy. And, yeah. So the first 2/3 of the movie is a lot like, hey, we got to get out of England, we got to get out of London. And like the last third is the zombie fight inside the mansion, like out of Resident Evil. So then that movie eventually had a sequel 28 weeks later And in fact, this year, here in 2025, we're going to see 28 years later, the third movie. So that helped, those two helped get the ball rolling. And then 2 years later, we had the other two that cemented everything. So in 2004, we had the Dawn of the Dead remake. And it's not better than the original, but it's almost as good. It's worthy of the name. It's different enough that it's not just a photocopy. Explores some different ideas and takes advantage of more modern techniques and things, and definitely a bigger budget. George Romero made his original three movies through private financing and not the studio system, so he had budget constraints he had to deal with. And that doesn't make them look cheap or anything. They all look competently made, but there's certain areas that just couldn't go with because of the budget. So the remake, however, had a real budget. So it has a couple stars you'd recognize. There's a lot more zombies in it. Most of them are probably real and not CG, except for maybe the big crowd shots. You've got not just the mall location, but you've got another neighboring location. You have a couple things that were filmed for the DVD. Because like the main characters are trapped in the mall, and across the parking lot, across the street, there's a gun shop, and they're communicating with that guy. They're going to try to go get him, but more importantly, the guns and ammunition that he has. And there's a whole thing they filmed just for the DVD, like him recording himself as he's stuck over there. Then there's also like a whole news segment as everything's just completely falling apart. That one does notably have three of the actors from the original Dawn of the Dead. Ken Foree, who I can't think of his character's name in the original off the top of my head, but he's a tall black police officer that winds up with the main group. He plays a preacher and has repeats one of his lines from the original. In the original, he talks about one of his relatives was a priest or voodoo priest, and he says that at one point he said that he told him when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. And so in this one, he's like a TV televangelist kind of deal. Is like everything's falling apart. So the last things on TV, he's talking about the world like living in sin and going through much things, and finally at the end he's like, and when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Then the other police officer that's with him in the original is in this one as a military commander at a base where they're bringing people that are trying to bring people to save them. And so he's on TV just for a moment or two. And then Tom Savini is the other one. And Tom Savini was the makeup guy for the original Dawn of the Dead. Also, 90s zombie movie I forgot to mention. The color remake of Night of the Living Dead came out in the 90s. And Tom Savini was a big force getting that to happen. Got George Romero's blessing. I do consider that one better than the original. Not just because it's in color, but there's certain choices that were made. Barbara's not just a bump on a log like she is in the original. Tony Todd is in that one. Major horror fame there. But just a few other things, I think it's better. And yeah, it's one of the only other zombie movies from the 90s. So the new one ends differently and go, like I said, goes other directions. But it's a big budget remake. People really put money behind this. And I think it had a genius marketing ploy where on USA, like a week or two before the movie came out, if I remember right, they actually played the first 8 minutes of the movie. And so you could see how extreme things were going to get. Because, yeah, if you've seen the movie, they ran up to the moment I can't think of the woman's name, crashes her car at the very beginning of the movie, which where the opening credits start in the movie. They ran all that unedited. So I thought that was a brilliant marketing ploy, and I'm sure that helped get people to the theaters. And I remember going to watch it and it was packed. So then, the other movie to come out that year was Shaun of the Dead. Now, it's a comedic take, but you can tell that that movie started life as just a zombie movie, that then they started adding the jokes into it because it is a competent zombie movie. It checks all the boxes. You know, you've got a few gross kills here and there. You got zombies eating people. But it's in England, so no one's got any guns, and they're having to avoid them, and like assorted comedic shenanigans occur. By the way, if you've never seen it, it's a great movie. But yeah, so those four movies really just brought the zombie genre back to life. Again, no pun intended. And really just like catapulted it out there. And then a few years after that, in 2010, is when The Walking Dead premiered. And that's like the pinnacle of the renaissance here. The Walking Dead went on to have 12 seasons, a spin-off show in Fear the Walking Dead, which I've talked about in another video, that had 8 seasons, and presently has 3 other spin-offs that are all either in their second season or their second season is about to premiere as of this recording. And so, like, that's like, it has to be what's fueling half of AMC at this point, as far as their original productions. So, and in the interim, we've had, like I said, 5 other Resident Evil movies. We've had George Romero went on to make 3 more zombie movies. One was theatrically released, Land of the Dead, and then there was Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead, which were straight to home video, but I think they're still decent. I think Diary is better than Survival, and Land of the Dead is really good. Now, Land of the Dead actually got studio backing, so there's stars you'd actually see elsewhere. I actually met the guy who played the main zombie, Big Daddy. I really should have got my picture taken with him. If he's at Indiana Comic Con again this year, I'm going to do that. He's a talkative guy, and he's got some other roles elsewhere. This isn't the only thing he's in. Yeah, you had Dennis Hopper's the main bad guy. John Leguizamo's in it. There's one character that his characters in the other 2 of those movies I mentioned, and so they're like he's a background character in Diary, and then he's the main character in Survival. So yeah, so Romero ended up making 3 more zombie movies. He doubled the number of zombie movies he had made during the Renaissance here, in the space of like, I had to check the dates for sure, but I'd say in the space of 10 years, versus the 60s, the 70s, and then the 80s for the other 3 movies. Pretty good gaps in between. And then we had movies like Zombieland, Zombieland 2. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the Sci-Fi Channel has their zombie series, which I should have written down the name earlier because I was going to forget it when I brought it back up again here. Z Nation. And then Z Nation has its own spin-off series on Netflix called Black Summer, which is the events prior to the start of Z Nation. Which, by the way, if you ever watch those 2 shows, they're like wildly different. Z Nation's kind of half jokey, hokey show. Black Summer is brutal. And yeah, like I don't see how we get from Black Summer to Z Nation. I don't. But yeah, the 2 seasons of Black Summer are pretty brutal. And in the meantime, we've had like the rise of the Korean zombie genre, which kind of began the Train to Busan, which ended up getting its own sequel. There's a series that was on Netflix called All of Us Are Dead. It's set in a high school, and it's supposed to be having a second season in the works. But yeah, just in other zombie movies, I'm kind of at a loss on the Korean ones at the moment, just off the top of my head. There's been some zombie anime series that have come out. One was, I think it's like 100 List. I could be wrong on the title of that. Basically, it's like 100 things a guy wants to do. Like, the world's ended, zombies have taken over, and he makes a list of 100 things he wants to do before he dies, because he presumes he's going to slip up and get eaten at some point. And so it's an ongoing anime series. It also has a live action adaptation that's on Netflix. It had 6 or 8 episodes. And there's just been several other zombie series that have popped up, and most of them follow like the traditional thing with zombies. Shoot them in the head, trying to eat people for food, things like that. But they'll have their own spin on something here or there. World War Z was a big selling book, and it was adapted into a movie. I believe it's got a sequel on the way, from what I understand. And so, yeah, we're still we're still going strong on the zombie renaissance, even though it started almost like 23 years ago. If we clock it in at 2002 with those first 2 movies, a little bit farther back if we count the Resident Evil games. But yeah, this is and it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. Like I said, AMC currently has in production 3 different spin-off shows for The Walking Dead. So that's more than what they had whenever they had The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead going, which was only 2 shows. There's at the very least World War Z Part 2 in the works. I'm given to understand they're going to reboot the Resident Evil franchise to make it more video game accurate. In the interim, there have been at least 1 Resident Evil movie that's not part of that franchise. It wasn't very good. There was an attempted series, which was also not overly great. But they keep trying. Like, there's money and interest there. They know it's there. There's the Korean zombie movies and shows, that more of those are going to wind up on Netflix at some point for Western audiences. Yeah, and like I said, you've got the anime coming at us. The Walking Dead comic book did actually finally hit a conclusion after a lot of issues. You have, in the comic front, you also have the Marvel zombies. I don't know if DC did zombies or not, and they did vampires recently. But the Marvel zombies I think they're going to make a comeback. Because initially Disney wasn't too keen on the idea, because a lot of them are well-known characters like Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man. These guys turned into zombies, like full-on flesh-eating zombies. Except it gets a little bit worse. They're all still self-aware and have their powers, and the only way to maintain any kind of cognitive abilities is to keep eating people. Which forces, like Hank Pym, for instance, captures T'Challa and just keeps cutting pieces off of him to eat so that he can maintain his mental awareness to try to solve the problem. And he's trying to plead with T'Challa, look, dude, you're a scientist like me. We've got to solve this problem. And, well, I need my brain power to do it. Sorry, you're the buffet. So yeah, the Marvel Zombies comics are pretty brutal. But I think they're making a comeback. Because, like I said, Disney was initially really hesitant, but eventually they relented, and they've been reprinted in a few other things. So I think they're coming back. There are 2 Star Wars zombie novels. I've read them both. They're both decent. But yeah, it's just the zombie genre is expanding. Now it might be slowing down a little bit. But in other aspects, like I said, The Walking Dead has the 3 spin-off shows. The Resident Evil is up to, I think, game number 8 in the franchise, plus some spin-offs. They've remade the first, second, and third game, and I think they're remaking the 4th one. So yeah, I mean, on a lot of fronts, things are still chugging along. Doesn't really show signs of slowing down. Which is interesting, because a little bit before this, and during this a little bit, it was said that depending on whether zombies or vampires were popular at the time, you could tell the general state of the economy. And vampires are popular when the economy is booming. because people don't want it to end, the whole immortality thing, Also, probably some message in there about about capitalism being for bloodsuckers or something. I don't know. I'll let the communists come up with something on that so I can laugh at them. Then, but on the flip side, or the economy's bad, zombies are in because everyone just wants to see it all crash and burn. They're like, bring on the apocalypse. I'd rather fight zombies than fight for my job or whatever. It's the rationale. And the fact that it's been chugging along since 2002 doesn't say overly great things about the economy, I guess. But, yeah. So we can thank those 4 movies, in my opinion, for getting us where we are today with our zombie movies. And, like I said, it doesn't seem to be slowing down. There's a new Return of the Living Dead movie on the way, although it could be a complete dumpster fire from what I hear. Sounds like it's being made by someone that may or may not actually have the rights. There's also some fan-made Return of the Living Dead movie. It's a whole circus with what's going on with that. I don't know. I watched some videos on YouTube, and I still have no idea what's going on with that. But yeah, so this has been my little spiel on how we got to where we are with the zombie movies, in particular our current resurgence, a resurrection, if you will, breathe new life to bring the dead to the living dead. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere that I'm just not smart enough to get, but yeah, funny enough, I guess. But yeah, so that's been my little presentation here on our current wave of newfangled zombie movies. I do hope it continues, because I like good zombie movies. I do like seeing variety. I like some of the things coming out of the Korean zombie movies. They're different. That's good. Thought World War Z was okay. Worth a watch. Like to see the second one. Haven't read the book. Did actually read a book written by a lady from Indiana, zombie book. I have the second one, but I think I need to reread the first one, because I think I lost track of what happened at the end, because I remember the end is really weird. So I should probably reread that before I read the second one, but I did finally buy the second one, so they're on the list now. Yeah. So anyway, that's about all I've got to say on this. Let me know what you folks think. Has this all been a good thing that the zombie movies have made a comeback like this? Yeah, there's trash. There's definitely, I definitely see rando zombie movies on Netflix or Amazon Prime that I watch, and I'm just like, wow, I really should have not wasted my hour and a half of my life on that. I would have been better served watching paint dry, but live and learn, I guess. I take these I waste my time, so you folks don't have to waste your time. So I should start doing videos on the trash ones too, I guess, to warn people. But yeah, that's about all I've got on this one. So like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I'll also comment, do you want more this is a little bit more long form, more just informative, plus some opinion in there. You want content like this on here? Yeah. Or do you not? Either way, let me know. But yeah, like, share, subscribe. Sharing and commenting help us expand the channel. It was appreciated. Obviously appreciate subscribers too. And constructive criticism. If there's something bad here, let me know. I don't want to just be spinning my wheels and look at this joker over here. If there's something constructive you want to say, spit it out. I can't stop you from unconstructive criticism. Wouldn't want to if I could, but anyway, that's all I got. So just remember, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.